Awesome. All right. So welcome. Where we're going to kick it off is on page 78. And what we're talking about at this point in the book is steps 8 and steps 9. And what's really interesting about that is I found that my experience is that these steps, it's not step 8 over here and step 9 over there, but we're going to have steps 8 and 9 intertwined. So we're going to look at okay, who do I need to make amends to? How do I build willingness? And then how I go out and make those amends. And we kind of spoke a lot about, that last week. That was kind of the focus of like, all right, how can I structure my 8-step list? And we shared a way that could be helpful, could be productive. And then we shared on how we actually go out and make those direct amends. And we had a 4-step process, 1 where we make the approach, 2 where we're specific, focusing on what I did with my defects of character. We had a whole character arc, the person that was peeing on the carpet, stealing the car, sleeping with the husband, that whole character arc, we made an amends. Delightful. Next, when we get to working with others, maybe that person will sponsor somebody who also slept with the husband, peed on the carpet, and stole the car. Character growth, it's exciting. So we focus on what we did, specific, focusing on our defective character. It can be then helpful. The 3rd step is to ask, what can I do to make it, or is there anything else? Did I leave anything out, or is there anything that you need to share with me? And what can I do to make it right? That's the 4th. So just a very, very quick review. Now, as we dive in on page 78, we're going to look at several examples of how we actually go and make amends. So the first one that we're going to dive into is, what do we do if we owe money? Then we're going to have a look at criminal offenses. And then we're going to look at relationship troubles, if there's been infidelity and if there's not. And then we look at ones where we might not be able to make direct amends for one reason or another. How can we approach those? So we're going to kick it off. And yeah, amends. As we've been talking about, amends, it's not a sorry. And so it's not the end of the world if the amends does include a sorry, but the amend is to repair or to restore or to make right. And that's what we're looking to do. So it says most alcoholics owe money. We're on the 2nd paragraph of page 78. And if you're here today and you're like, yeah, I owe money, that's good news. We got directions for that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing, as we go through these directions, it's important to understand that, man, if it's given us directions in the book about anything, what that means is that so many of us were doing it that the book had to give us directions on how to amend it. So if you're like, man, I'm stressed about money, I owe a lot of debt, or I stole a lot of things, or man, I was unfaithful in relationships, I don't know what to do. What I want you to know is you're not alone. They didn't waste time on this book on things that were not applicable. So that's something that's important and comforting. So most alcoholics owe money. Here's what we do with money. We do not dodge our creditors. That is a direction. I remember I was at my home group many, many years ago, and there was a gentleman, it was before the meeting started. He opened, his phone was ringing, and he answered his phone, and he was like, Boston Pizza Calgary, how can I help you? And I was like, what was, as a creditor? That is dodging our creditors. If you're wondering, what does it look like to dodge our creditors? It looks like answering the phone and pretending to be a local chain restaurant. That is dodging. Not dodging our creditors looks like calling them. I know, crazy. We're answering some of those collection calls. I know, mind-boggling. Who would do that, right? And it says so that's the first direction. We're not going to dodge our creditors. Telling them what we are trying to do, we make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. So if we owe money to a bank or a credit card, they can probably see that it says $100 deposit or $100 withdrawal, $100 withdrawal, liquor store, liquor store, liquor store, $100 withdrawal, $100 withdrawal. They can figure out what we were doing. You know what I'm saying? They know it's not a mystery to them. I think I'm mysterious, but my banking information says otherwise, And what are we trying to do? We're trying to, again, the purpose of amends is to set right our wrongs. So when we sit down with them, we're saying or speak to them on the phone if it's collection. I'm trying to make things right. And to explain that, we're in recovery. It could be helpful to explain that we are in a 12-step program and we are trying to make an amends. And so it says, nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory that it may cause financial harm. Right? So I'm not withholding information because I'm afraid of how I'll look. I might withhold it if it's not going to be helpful to others. But man, this is step 9 is where some real freedom from fear comes. We're going to see, depending on how I do for time, we're going to see either this week or next week, those step 9 promises. You'll notice in the step 9 promises, it says fear of people or of economic insecurity will leave us. That doesn't mean people or economic insecurity will leave us. That means the fear of. And man, it really is when we go out and make amends, that freedom of what people think of me begins to fall. That ability, the ability to communicate. You know where I got that? Amends. Because that is some communication under pressure. I was scared to do that. But that gave me the ability to communicate. And that's where we begin to lose our fear of financial insecurity. We might not be millionaires overnight. And in fact, if that's an expectation you have, I will help you with the inventory process because you're going to need to write on it. You know what I'm saying? But the fear of that economic insecurity, that is what will leave us. So approached in this way, the most ruthless creditors will sometimes surprise us. And actually, that's been my experience. I didn't have too many major financial, like I had student loans, which was quite an ordeal, but I didn't have too many financial amends. But you'd be surprised at how chill some of these people were. You know what I mean? And just being frank, open, and honest was just the direction we saw at the top of 78. This is an important direction. It says arranging the best deal we can. We let these people know that we are sorry. Now, keep in mind, you're like, hey girl, you said no sorries. I didn't say hardcore no sorries. I said an amend is far more than a sorry. But the point is, we're not going to go into financial amends and just martyr ourselves. You know what I mean? And like, I don't know about you guys, but when I've owed financial amends, and I didn't have too many, but I had some. I wanted to be Scrooge McDuck. And some of you maybe don't get that reference, but I wanted to be Scrooge McDuck and show up with my bag of money, and it was gold coins in my mind. And I wanted to drop it on the table, and I wanted to be amended. Yeah, paid off. You know what I mean? That's what I wanted to do. My income prohibited that. That was a little cost prohibitive for me. I wasn't able to go and Scrooge McDuck it. And so what I had to do is arrange the best deal we can. And that is a direction. So if you're calling your creditors, you can negotiate with them. They're in collections. There's things like sometimes we have to do things like consumer proposals, and it can be helpful to get some outside help to help navigate some of those things. But I'm not trying to martyr myself financially. And an interesting thing about me wanting to Scrooge McDuck my way through amends, which again, if there are people who are like younger than me, that probably, I don't think you guys had DuckTales. And maybe that's a very limited reference, but anywho, when it comes to financial amends to family members or loved ones, there's oftentimes a lot more spiritual value in not being able to pay it off right away. In fact, there's oftentimes immense spiritual value with arranging the best deal I can and making those payments on a monthly basis. Because I don't know about you, but I struggled with consistency in my relationships when I was in my alcoholism, when I was in my active addiction. I couldn't show up consistently. And there's tremendous value in demonstrating that change, making that payment like I promised I would, month after month after month for them. But it's kind of a cool thing to do for myself as well. Ultimately, it allows us to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And so it says our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear. And I might not lose creditors. It might take me a long time to be restored financially, but I must lose my fear of creditors, no matter how far we have to go. And this is a warning. You'll notice we see a lot of warnings in this book, for we are liable to drink if we are afraid to face them. Why do I need to get free of fear? Oh, creditors, that's a beautiful question. So a creditor would be anyone that I owe money to. So it could be Visa, MasterCard. It could be cell phone company. I'm sure no one here would get cell phones at different cell phone companies and not pay them and, rank up those bills. I'm sure no one here ever ran from what cable company to cable company. You know what I mean? those, yeah, absolutely. Anyone you owe money to. The term creditors itself often looks a little bit more like, institutions, but it can be anyone that I owe money to. Absolutely. And just something that can be helpful, because as we're talking about step 8 and step 9, I'm just going to share the screen and kind of show you guys how we set up an example of how we could set up the 8-step list. So in this 8-step list, I'm writing down all the people or institutions that I owe amends to, and I'm putting them into my columns of willingness. Now, if I owe any money, it can be really prudent, really helpful to make a little note of my best estimate of how much money I owe. How much money I owe. I can put that sort of beside the name, beside the company, or beside that, and I can make a little total at the end, and then that helps me to begin to sort of attack that situation and begin to pay it back. And you know what happens? I'm sure nobody here relates to struggling with some of the finances. And sure everyone is super secure with financial stuff. Totally not an area of fear for anyone. But I know for me, sometimes my mind can start spinning out, and putting out on paper how much it is really helps me to see it for what it really is. And I can begin to work towards paying that. And just a thing that can be really helpful with financial amends is if I'm having to make monthly payments, it can be prudent to start with the lowest amount that I owe first, so that I pay that off, and then I can build some financial momentum with that. That's just something that I found really helpful. Also, a suggestion that nobody has ever taken me up on: if I do owe a financial amends where I do have to make that payment all at once, I'm not able to make it incrementally, it can be really helpful to open up a savings account that's just for my financial amends. So it's a little harder to touch, it's a little tucked away, just something that's helpful, no pressure, no stress. Awesome. Yeah, Scrooge McDuck. We got a bunch of Scrooge McDucks in the chat. I love that. I say these things, and then I'm surprised I say them too. Like if you're like, wow, I didn't expect that she was going to say that. I didn't expect I was going to say that either a lot of the time. I want you to know I'm as surprised as anyone. All right. So now what we're going to do is transition into what do we do if we've committed a crime. I am sure none of you law-abiding, wonderful citizens can relate to this, but this is just for deviants like myself. So what do we do if we've committed a crime? So it says, perhaps we have committed a criminal offense, which might land us in jail if it were known to the authorities. I'm sure it's just me. We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. Awesome. And so it's that short in the accounts and unable to make good. That might be if I was stealing from work. Yeah, no, that's an awesome plan. It's if I was stealing from work, or when you're borrowing from people or borrowing from things, borrowing, and not able to pay it back. So we have already admitted this in confidence to another person. So when did we do that? We did that in the 5th step, right? So we shared that with God and another human being in the 5th step. But we are sure we would be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. So we've got that fear, right? Maybe it's only a petty offense, such as padding the expense account. That's kind of stealing from work is what that is. Most of us have done that sort of thing. So keep in mind, if it's in this book, and you're like, man, I've done this, or man, I've broken the law, or man, I've done things I shouldn't have done. You're not alone. That is why we have directions on how we can make this right. Maybe we are divorced and have remarried, but haven't kept up the alimony to number 1. She is indignant about it. Indignant. That is that level of anger. It's like, ooh, that is some anger. I'm not going to be able to talk to you. You're a little indignant. By the way, if you're dealing with somebody and they're that angry, don't tell them that they're indignant. You can just make a mental note to approach it later. Timing. Do not call an indignant person indignant. Not helpful. We're gonna talk about relationships here in a bit, but again, just gonna help you out with that one. For those that are married, she has a warrant out for our arrest. That's a common form of trouble too. So haven't been making payments for child support, alimony, haven't been, doing that sort of stuff. And it says, although, indignant is that anger. So it says, although these reparations take innumerable forms. So a reparation in my 1930s dictionary is, again, about restoring and repairing and making right. So how do we make right these crimes? How do we make right these things? And innumerable means it's like too many to count. So what it's saying is like, man, we have a whole variety of ways that we can make amends in these situations. We don't always know one set way. There's a number of ways. But there are some general principles we find guiding. So here are some general principles which will help guide us in how we can make amends for criminal offenses. It says, reminding ourselves that we have decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience. Man, that has really bitten us in the butt. So that's the second time in amends. It's like, hey, girl, you agreed at the beginning to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol or any lengths for victory over whatever's bringing you here. It's like, man, who would have known that would have bit me in the butt? So if you're wondering, hey, wait a minute, Paige, when did I agree to do that sort of shenanigans? Well, if we're going through the book line by line, we would have answered that question on page 58. When we took the statement, made it a question. Do you want what we have? And are you willing to go to any length to get it? And often too, in working with others, sometimes we agree to that earlier. So in working with others, we often present that question to potential sponsees a lot earlier than in step 3. But man, at the beginning, okay. And so that's part of the willingness. It's that reminding myself, I've made this decision. I'm willing to go to any lengths. And then it says, and by the way, why would I need to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience? Now, I'm just reiterating this because we have some people that are new and some people who might not know. To understand step 1 is to understand a relapse is inevitable for somebody like me. I will relapse. Step 1 is not if I relapse. Step 1 is when I relapse. I will relapse. And the only hope that somebody like me has is a spiritual experience, is that spiritual awakening that happens at step 12. It'll happen along the way. But that's what's promised in step 12. And so that's why I need this spiritual awakening, because if I do not have it, I will relapse. And I got to any lengths, and any lengths are described in this book. So it goes on to say, we ask. And anytime in this book, it says we ask, what is that? It's a prayer. And we talk about building willingness. I don't know about you. We spoke about this last week. We spoke about some shenanigans for building willingness. We spoke about amenders. We spoke about amends roulette. We spoke about all that sort of stuff. But a very traditional big book way of building willingness is to pray for the willingness. And so this prayer, some people call it one of the 9th step prayers. I don't mind if you call it a 9th step prayer or an 8th step prayer. That's not a hill that I am bothered about. But it is that sort of pre-amends direction. So it feels like an 8-step direction for somebody like me. But again, call it what you want. What matters is if I pray it, not what I call it. So we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. We may lose our position, which might be, we might lose our job or our status, or reputation, which is how people see us, or face jail. But we are willing. We have to be. We must not shrink at anything. And how I say that prayer is, God, I ask that I be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. Help me to be willing to not shrink at anything. That's how I like to say it. You say it however you want. I'm not going to mandate, because I know there's nothing worse than telling somebody what they have to do. It's like, I'm going to do the opposite. I know that. I sponsored enough. You do what you want, but that's how I do it. All right. And so it's what that paragraph is telling us is our level of willingness does need to be at the level of any lengths. I'm willing to go to absolutely any lengths to make this right. But now the next paragraph where it says usually, this is a paragraph of discernment. And I speak about discernment a lot. Discernment is to use judgment without being judgmental. And it says usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we are not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. So I might have people that rely on me, their lives depend on my ability to provide for them in a number of ways. Therefore, maybe me just throwing myself into jail might not be the best thing to do. So let's use some discernment. And here we're going to see an example of how we can handle this. So it says, a man we know had remarried. Because of resentment and drinking, he had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life. And again, these 12 steps, it's not a set it and forget it deal. It's not crockpot, set it and forget it. It's stir fry. I got to keep working it. You know what I mean? I got to do this as a way of life. So he had started this way of life, had secured a position. What that means, he got a job. And was getting his head above water. So starting to, make some money financially, starting to get out of some of the trouble that he was in. It would have been impressive heroics if he had walked to the judge and said, here I am. It didn't say, but that felt like the tone for the heroics, like, here I am. I am here. Here I am to save the day, by going to jail. And here again, here is the subtlety. It says, we thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary. So I need to have that level of willingness to go to any lengths. But if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. We suggested he write his first wife, admitting his faults, like we saw in our second part of the amends, to admit our faults, being specific when applicable and focusing on our defects of character, and asking forgiveness. He did, and also sent a small amount of money. And that is important. If I owe financial amends, I do have to show up with it doesn't have to be a Scrooge McDuck amount of money. We've covered this. But I need to show up at least with some of the money and a payment plan that I follow through on. That is so important. And so that's what he did. He made his amends. He made it over a letter, and he admitted his faults, and he sent money. And it goes on to say, and he told her what he would try to do in the future, explaining that I'm going to make these monthly payments. That's what he's trying to do. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Of course, she did not. And the whole situation has long since been adjusted. So the length of willingness, any lengths, but I have to use discernment. In that case, he used discernment. So, top of page 80, welcome to those who have just joined. So it says before. So these are some pre-amends directions. For me, that feels a little step 80, no pressure. I don't care if you call them step 9, but for me, it feels a little step 8. Just like to point out where I'm seeing them all intertwined and intermeshed, because I think that's fun. All right, top of page 80. Before taking drastic action, by the way, every amends I've ever done, it feels real drastic right before I got to go do it, doesn't it? Maybe y'all just approach them nice and calm and unbothered, but like pre-amends, oh girl, that's drastic, Before taking drastic action, which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. So if any amends that I'm going to make is going to affect other people or might throw somebody else under the bus, it's important to get their consent. If we have obtained permission, have consulted with others. So these are some directions, pre-amends sort of directions. Yeah, we got some must. It's a little musty in here. We got some musts. Sorry. That's, anywho. So if we have obtained permission, consulted with others, asked God to help, and the drastic step is indicated, we must not shrink. So if I've obtained permission, good to go. Consulted with others. Who are some good people that I should consult with about my amends? Well, my sponsor's usually a good person. Yeah, we're going to talk. Yeah, God's the best. But our sponsor can be a wonderful person to run the amends by. It's also helpful to have pillars, people that are, working the program alongside us that we can kind of take things to. Consulted with others. And then it says, asked God to help. At any point in this book, it says, asked, we asked, what's that? That's a prayer. Y'all know there was a sneaky little prayer on page 80. So what do I got to do before I make amends? Yeah, I got to ask God for help. Because, man, I don't know about you. Amends, they're scary. They're not after you do them a while, but you know what I mean? Pre-amends, before, if you're new and you're like, oh God, we're talking about amends. Ooh, you know what I mean? It's scary, I know it is. And I love that idea of asking God for help. And whenever I have to do anything that feels frightening, really what I'm not doing it. You know what I mean? Maybe you don't know what I mean. What I mean is what I try to do is get me out of the way because I can't do it. And I try to let God flow through me. That's what I'm trying to do. And that's what I'm trying to do with amends. Get me out of the way and let God flow through me. So ask God to help. And it says, and the drastic step is indicated, we must not shrink. If you're wondering, what does the drastic step being indicated mean and look like? It looks like this feeling in our stomach where it goes, oh, you know what I mean? It means like you showed up to this big book study today, or you're listening to the recording and you're hearing me talk about amends, and you're like, oh no, because it's reminding you of one that you don't want to do, and you're like, shut up, Paige, shut up, move along to step 10, hurry up, you know what I mean? That for me is the drastic step being indicated, that feeling, and it really is a feeling within myself. Man, I know what I owe an amends, you know what I mean? Because I can feel it, oh, you know, and I usually want to like try to justify why I don't actually owe the amends. You know, that's how I know. When I'm like, wait a minute, no, that's how I know. All righty. So it says, and actually, this is kind of before we go to their story. I was working with a sponsee one time, and she was living in a sober living house. And the amends that she had to make was they would get food bank donations to the house. And her and a roommate of hers, what they did was they would grab the food bank donations and grab the cheese and hide the cheese, so they could just not have to share the cheese. And I was like, this is a beautiful amends to start with. Why? Because they were all friends, and I did not think any, because I show up to amends and I'm like, I am going to lose friends over the cheese. You know what I mean? I'm going to be arrested over the cheese. It's going to be awful. No, nobody was upset about the cheese. And I knew nobody was going to be upset about the cheese, but it was this beautiful opportunity to go and to make the amends and to not implicate her cheese thief buddy. You know what I mean? We're not throwing anyone on the other cheese thief, not under the bus. And we knew that it was going to go. I knew it was going to go well. I don't think the sponsee knew that, but I knew it was going to go well. And that was a beautiful example at the top of page 80 where, you know, we made amends without throwing anyone else under the bus. Welcome. Yeah, like mice, which little cheese hoarders. Yeah, delightful. Did you know the rodent, it comes from the French word rodent, which is to chew. That's what rodent means. That is absolute ADHD. And if you're wondering, hey, I would like Paige to go off on tangent, it's not that hard. You just put some in the chat and I'll go. I'll talk about the etymological origin of rodent, because somebody's like, mice like cheese. And I'm like, they do. Do you know we don't have rats in Alberta? Off I go. You know what I mean? Okay. So this brings to mind, not my mind's all over the place, but the book's mind. This brings to mind the story about one of our friends. While drinking, he accepted a sum of money from a bitterly hated business rival, giving him no receipt for it. So that's the first part. So here's this guy, he was given this money, and he didn't give the guy who gave this bitter, like, you know, these business rivals, he didn't give him a receipt. He subsequently denied having received the money and used the incident as a basis for discrediting the man. He thus used his own wrongdoing as a means of destroying the reputation of another. In fact, his rival was ruined. So what I want to point out, so there's two guys, the one guy and his business rival. The business rival gave him a bunch of money and the guy didn't give him a receipt. And then he was like, he didn't give me the money. And he used that as to say he's a liar and he's a cheat and to ruin his reputation. So what was the harm caused? And I just point this out because it's important. The harm that was caused wasn't necessarily stealing the money, because I don't think that was his personal money. I think that was the company he was working for's money. The harm was ruining his reputation. That was the real harm that was done. That character assassination, ruining this guy's reputation. That's what we're talking about. So he felt he'd done a wrong he could not possibly make right. If he opened that old affair, he was afraid it would destroy the reputation of his partner, his business partner, disgrace his family and take away his means of livelihood. So he would lose his job. Yes, he absolutely did ruin this guy's reputation. That's what happened. So he absolutely did. So, and he's like, man, I don't know if I make it right, I'm going to lose my job and I'm not going to be, and I work in business with a partner and that's going to affect him, his money. And, you know, I'm not going to be able to provide for my spouse. So that was sort of his conundrum. So he's approaching this with a bit of discernment. And so it says, what right had he to involve those dependent upon him? How could he possibly make a public statement exonerating his rival? So letting him know that he was in the wrong, letting people know. We're trying to repair his reputation. After consulting his wife and partner, he came to the conclusion that it was better to take those risks than stand before his creator guilty of such ruinous slander. So he could feel that in his heart, man, to not say anything, that is not the right thing to do. He saw, now this is important, he saw that he had to place the outcome in God's hands, or he would soon start drinking again and all would be lost anyhow. Right after I come to the rooms of 12 step, before I come to the rooms of 12 step, there's one reason for relapse, and that is the inevitability of the relapse, the mental obsession that will inevitably take me back time and time again to the first drink or the first drug or the first compulsive act that brings you to this study. But also, once I come to the rooms of 12 step, there's only one other reason for relapse, and it's a failure to grow spiritually. And he knows that in his heart that he's got that feeling, man, I know I did wrong. I know it wasn't the right thing to do. He knows he cannot stay sober if he's got that in his heart. And what do? He puts the outcome in God's hands. I don't know if y'all remember in step 3, we got that pink slip. Some of you got a literal one. Some of you, I made it for it, send it off to you. They got that pink slip. I got fired from the management position of my life. And did you know that how my amends are received or the results of my amends is not my business? Y'all know that is upper management. And I have been absolutely horrifically fired from upper management because I am an atrocious manager of my life and the lives of those around me. So really, it's in God's hands. And again, when we approach amends, the results of them, not in my hands, in God's hands. How they're received, how it goes, none of my business. And it says he attended church, not a church, church for the first time in many years. After the sermon, he quietly got up and made an explanation. His action met widespread approval, and today he is one of the most trusted citizens of his town. This all happened years ago. And again, I want to contextualize, wait, why is this guy going to church? Like, what does that have to do with anything? Well, keep in mind the time in which this book was written and the context. So it's in the 1930s, and going to church was actually far more of a community thing. So a lot of communities would go to church together. Now, he could not put on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. You know what I mean? He couldn't. Now, that's not how we make amends. We don't make the amends on Facebook. He probably wasn't going to be able to get a billboard. And, you know, maybe, oh, sorry, there's a baby. Hi. Sorry, and now the baby's gone, so I just look like a crazy person. But it's all good. But there's that idea that, like, that's where the community went. So if you were to make a public statement so that information would be disseminated throughout the community to let people know what had actually happened, that was going to be the quickest, most effective, and most efficient way to do it. So again, I just want to contextualize that, because I would read that and be like, why is it going to church? Do I have to go to church? I don't want to, you know what I mean? So that's what we're talking about. Yeah. Yeah. And so actually, Rob put in the chat, it's likely that this might have been Hank Parkhurst. I also heard stories that it was possibly referring to an Oxford group story as well. So who it was, that we don't know, but what matters is it's an example for us to follow. All right. So now this brings us to domestic troubles. So how do I handle I'm sure no one relates to domestic troubles. I'm sure it's just, yeah, no one here relates. But here's what we do if we have relationship troubles, especially in the area of romantic relationships. That's what we're talking about. So the chances are we have domestic troubles. Perhaps we're mixed up with women in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. We doubt if in this respect, alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people. Remember on top of page 69, it said, we all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. But, so back to 81, but drinking does complicate sex relations in the home. After a few years of living with an alcoholic, a wife, a partner, a spouse, a loved one gets worn out, resentful, uncommunicative. So we hurt people and they start to withdraw from us. They start to put up walls because of our repeated hurting, right? How could she be anything else? The husband, in this case, the alcoholic or addict or whatever brings you to this study, begins to feel lonely, sorry for himself, self-pity. I gotta always watch for that. He commences to look around in the nightclubs or their equivalent for something besides liquor. Perhaps he is having a secret and exciting affair with the girl who understands. In fairness, we must say that she may understand. But what are we going to do about a thing like that? Now, what it's important to do is realize that this part of the book, there's another baby. Yes. Sorry, I need to focus because I will just play peekaboo for the 20 minutes we have left. Like there is something in my brain that I'm like, yeah, peekaboo. I am like an all-star peekaboo. It's happening. Yes. Peekaboo. Sorry, I will focus. Listen, I think it's quite obvious. Attention, not my forte. But what we're talking about with the reading is that idea of like, I might be alone in this world with only a copy of this book. What I might need is I might be living in, for me, Calgary, Alberta in 1941, and I don't know a single other sober alcoholic, and I've been given a copy of this book, somehow managed to get a copy of this book. And I don't have a sponsor. There's no home group, there's no meetings. I can't Zoom in. I can't listen to Joe and Charlie Big Book Study to try and understand it. You know what I mean? I'm reading this book and I might be really defended about this. And so that idea, when it says, in fairness, we may say that she may understand. That is the book, again, meeting us where we're at. But it's going to take us to where we need to go. But what are we going to do about a thing like that? We need to make this right. So again, meeting us where we're at, taking us where we need to go. It says a man so involved often feels remorseful at times, especially if he's married to a loyal and courageous girl who has literally gone through hell for him. Whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. If we are sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Not always, we think. And so this might be where we're, hey, what about that any lengths? And I do still think it means any lengths, but I do think what we need to use is discernment. And we're going to see some directions on how we use this discernment, not about what's best for me, but what's best for the other person. We're going to see that in the top 82. I have a bad habit of spoiling things that come in the next paragraph. I'm like, oh, that's coming up. And I get so excited and I can't wait. Anywho. So if she knows in a general way that we have been wild, should we tell her in detail? And it says, undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. So that's what I need to do. Regardless of how much detail I go into, I need to admit my fault. She may insist on knowing all the particulars. She will want to know who the woman is and where she is. We feel we ought to say to her that we have no right to involve another person. Again, that principle that we began to see in step 5, where I don't get to save my own skin at another person's expense. So I don't get to throw other people under the bus. We are sorry for what we have done. And keep in mind, an amends, not simply a sorry. There is more that we have to do. And God willing, it shall not be repeated. More than that, we cannot do. We have no right to go further. Though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, so we're just giving some examples of the best way to maybe go about this. We're not telling you how you have to go about this. We have often found this the best course to take. And it says our design for living. This design for living is these 12 steps as a way of life. That is what we're talking about. It's not a set it and forget it deal. It's not a one-way street. It is as good for the wife as for the husband. And what it's saying is this way of life can be of help to anyone. And that is a theme that we're really beginning to pick up and will continue to pick up during the later chapters. Now, this is a tough sentence, so bear with me with this. It says, if we can forget, so can she. Now, if I've ever been, and I have been like on the other side of infidelity, where like what I'm trying to say is I've been cheated on. That can be a tough line if you've been cheated on, where it's like if they can forget, they're the one that betrayed my trust and broke my heart, right? Like, are you kidding me? But here's what I know through working with probably hundreds of people over the years. The people who have committed the infidelity are often terribly racked with a guilt that is eating away at them. That is something that I found again and again and again. And I believe what we're pointing to is that idea, if I, regardless of who I am in that situation, if I can get freedom, so can the other person. I believe that's what we're pointing to. And it says, it is better, however, that one does not needlessly name a person upon whom she can vent jealousy. Perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. Sometimes there are cases we just got to lay it all out and be fully honest. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. It may be that both will decide that the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. Now, this is an important direction. It says each might pray about it. Okay, so this is a prayer. And this is, again, to me, sounds like some important directions. And this is revolutionary for somebody like me. Having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. Do you know what that means? I'm praying to see what would be best for them, not for me. You know, I'm sure I'm the only one that's been like, what about me? You know, and actually, if I ever start thinking or start saying, what about me? Oh, that's how I know I've slipped into self. It is not about what is best for me. It is about what is best for the other person. What a beautiful principle to apply to not just this one specific area of what to do if there's been infidelity, but what a beautiful way to approach almost any situation in my life. What would be best for others rather than what would be best for me? Keep it always in sight that we're dealing with the most terrible human emotion, jealousy. So there are times where being directly honest could cause more harm than it could good. And that's what we're talking about. Good generalship. So this is kind of like a war metaphor, like being the general of the situation, trying to figure out how to best handle it, to navigate this, may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank to a more indirect way rather than risk face-to-face combat. That's what the metaphor is saying. And now we transition to, okay, let's say I didn't, have any infidelity. Let's say that wasn't a part of my story. Well, this is where we transition. Again, we're still in the realm of our relationships. It says, if we have no such complication, there is plenty we should do at home. So, oh man, I thought I didn't have to do anything. What do you mean plenty? And we're not just talking about the dishes. We're talking about real house cleaning. All right. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say that the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. Right? Been in meetings, sobriety is my only amends. The only thing I got to do is stay sober. Sobriety is a bare minimum. And in fact, if I don't make amends, I'm probably not going to stay sober. So it says, certainly he must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't. But he's yet a long way from making good. Again, if I'm not sure, amend, to make good, to make right, to repair, right? To the wife or parents whom for years he is so shockingly treated. Sobriety is a beautiful, vital, important start, but it is not an amends. I need to make it right. Passing all understanding is the patience mothers and wives have had with alcoholics. Had this not been so, many of us would have no homes today, would perhaps be dead. The alcoholic is like a tornado. And there's a lot of metaphors in this. Now, keep in mind, if you're wondering who needs to be on my 8-step list, of course, it gave us directions coming from step 4. We can move over a lot of those names from step 4. But there's also a method that's known as the tornado method, which I'm the tornado. And so it's like I am the eye of the storm. And the people who are closest to me are the ones who got the brunt of that force. And I can spiral out and spiral out and spiral out and see from there who I owe an amends to. Does that make sense? So it says the alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken. It's important for me to understand I broke those hearts. I broke those hearts. Sweet relationships are dead. I killed those sweet relationships. Affections have been uprooted. I uprooted the affections. I did. I ripped them out, right? Like we talked about root and branch. I pulled it out of the soil. It's gone. It's a selfish and inconsiderate habits. My selfish and my inconsiderate habits have left the home in turmoil. You know, that terrible tension that grips the home of every alcoholic, that feeling of constant fighting, that's me that created that. And it says, we feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is not enough. You can underline and highlight that. Me thinking sobriety, that's the only thing I got to do. I am not thinking about the harm that I caused others. He is like the farmer who comes out of his cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife, he remarked, "Don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing?" And what this metaphor is, I'm the tornado. I'm the one that just tore down the barn. I'm the one that put the cow in the tree. But I also, in my metaphor, the cow is in the tree, but the cow is safe and unhurt in the tree because I have an affinity for cows. I really like them. As I'm like, what is it? So I think the last time I talked about cows, there was a bunch of cow pictures in the chat. Don't see anything the matter here, Mom. Yeah. So we don't need to, anywho, that's important. It's like, I'm the one that did it. And if getting sober, all I've done is stop destroying the farm. That's all I've stopped doing. Now, where I live in Canada, we used to have a lot of buffalo that had roamed the prairies. And when I was in the third grade, I heard this, I think it was the third grade. We went to the museum and there was a Blackfoot elder that told us this story. And it's the story of the buffalo. And if you've ever seen like a buffalo, a North American buffalo, because I know there's buffaloes in other parts of the world, but a North American buffalo, you'll know that the buffalo has that long shaggy coat on its head and on its shoulders, and it gets a little bare on its bottom, you know, a little short hair on its bum. And the story of the buffalo is that idea that when a storm comes, the other animals, like the rabbits and the deer and the gazelles, they try to sprint away from the storm. And in so doing, what happens is that prolongs the storm. You know what I mean? So they're trying to run away, and it just makes the storm last longer because they can't outrun it, right? And I'll tell you what happens when I come to the ninth step is I want to gazelle my butt away from it. You know what I mean? I don't want to have nothing to do with those events. I just want to go the other way. But the buffalo, what the buffalo does is the buffalo walks towards the storm. And in facing the storm and walking towards the storm, the buffalo cuts the storm in half. And when do these step 9 promises that we may not get to today, when do these step 9 promises come true? Before we are halfway done. But the difference between me and the buffalo is that I am also the storm, right? I am the one that created that damage and that destruction. And so that is my responsibility. I got to face that storm. I got to clean it up. And it says, yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. I've got to rebuild it. I got to put that barn back together. I've got to safely and gently get the cow on level ground. You know what I mean? I got to get the chicken coop back up. You know, you can tell the grain silo is knocked over. I gotta fix that. You can tell I don't know much about farming. And it says, we must take the lead. Right? I've got to take the lead. I've got to start repairing. I don't wait for them. I've got to take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fit the bill at all. This is not a sorry. I've got to go and repair and restore. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being careful not to criticize them. So what are we doing? We're explaining to them the harms we caused, focusing on not theirs, but our defects of character. And this is the book meeting us where we're at. Again, it says their defects may be glaring. You can almost see us reading it by ourselves and we're like, but their defects are glaring. You want me to do what? And it's like, well, their defects may be glaring, meaning that's where we're at, going to take us where we need to go. But the chances are that our own actions are partially responsible. Oh man, what do you mean? That they were only a jerk in relation to my selfishness and inconsideration for years? Oh, calling me out. So we clean house with the family. So we go and make it right with the family. And it says asking. So this is again another prayer, asking each morning in meditation. What does that tell me? That tells me that morning meditation is not optional. It's part of this deal, that we have a morning meditation practice. So asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. And I love that idea. Again, get me out of the way, and God, Creator, help that flow through me, that patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. And we're going to see that this is a theme that is going to pick up, and we're going to see this in the later chapters, this idea of showing others patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. And it says, the spiritual life is not a theory. So what that means is this is absolutely not an intellectual exercise. This is not me telling you what I know, although sometimes if you put things in chat, I will go on a tangent and it'll be about, look, let me tell you about the etymological origins of that word, or oh, let me talk about Scrooge McDuck for 20 minutes. You know what I mean? But it is not about what I know. What I know does not keep me sober. What I know does not repair the damage done. What I know does not make it right. It says we have to live it. I am called to be a demonstration of these spiritual principles, these 12 steps. I need to demonstrate. It does no good if I'm telling you to do inventory, but I'm not taking inventory. I've got to demonstrate that power. And it says, unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, to live this 12-step way of life, we think we ought not urge them. So we're not trying to force this on other people. We're not trying to make them work the steps. We should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. Here's a sneaky little promise. They will change in time. And here's how they change. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. I need to be a demonstration. If I'm all upset that my family's not doing what I think they should be doing, if I've got loved ones that I think that they gotta work the program, I've got to demonstrate the program. It doesn't do any good if I tell you how long I've been sober. What does good is me making amends, demonstrating, right? We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. My actions over years and years and years, it takes a long time of consistency to rebuild that trust. And that's what I'm called to do. I've got to be the one to take the lead. I've got to be the one to demonstrate that change, to demonstrate the power of this program. Not telling you, hey, look at me, I'm so great, I'm sober, and it ran, the wind stopped blowing, but to demonstrate how this new power has flowed through me. Now, I think what I'll do is I'll leave it there, and then I'll live in deep shame for the rest of the week that I didn't finish step 9. I won't, I'll get over it. It's the lack of focus. I'll get distracted about other things and forget about it. But where we're going to pick up next week is we're going to talk about how can we make amends in some cases where we can't fully make it right. Maybe they've passed on, that sort of stuff. And then we're going to dive into the step 9 promises, which, yeah, but then we're going to talk about the step 10 promises, which are super rad. So why don't I'll leave it there. I'll stop the recording and we'll pick it up next week, and I'll unmute so we can all pray together. So